There are some Pokemon lines out there that feel like they should be other types than what they are. A major example of this that always sticks in my mind is the Trapinch line. They look so much like bug Pokemon. I mean, come on. Vibrava has the multiple legs and the buzzing wings of a bug Pokemon just like Yanma does. But they aren't. They're ground dragon types. Well, Psyduck and Golduck are another one of those Pokemon lines. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would care for and raise a Pokemon line in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the Psyduck line. Psyduck itself is a 2.5 foot tall and 43 pound yellow bird Pokemon. It has cream-colored feet and a bill, along with 3 black hairs on top of its head. As well, this Pokemon is constantly holding its head because of the fact that the entire species suffers from constant and chronic migraines. Which, honestly, sounds like it sucks. But these migraines are the reason for that intro, because when they get bad enough, Psyduck has to release the pressure that has built up, and to do so, it unleashes immense psychic abilities. I don't know why it isn't classified as a psychic type due to that, but oh well. Psyduck doesn't seem to be able to do so at will and doesn't seem to remember the incidents when they do happen, so it's something that's under research. Golduck is the evolution of Psyduck, now sporting a blue body and large limbs with huge webbed feet and hands. The bill has also shortened and gotten sharper, and now a red gem sits in the center of its forehead. It stands at the same height as an average person, 5 foot 7 inches, and weighs the same as one too, being an average of 169 pounds. Funny enough, the chronic headaches go away when it evolves, but it now has full control over its psychic abilities, even being able to use them to hunt down prey and communicate ideas to other Pokemon and even people. It's not to the level of psychic communication that some of the true psychic types, like Alakazam or Gardevoir, are said to be able to do, but it can still get across ideas or images. Honestly, when I was doing research for this guide, I fell down a rabbit hole of watching videos online of Golduck owners showing off this ability. Crazy stuff. But that's these two Pokemon in a nutshell. Let's get into it and see if these Pokemon could possibly be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. With these two being water types, you have to know that they're going to need water. These Pokemon are freshwater Pokemon, like the Squirtle line that we covered so long ago, meaning that they usually live in ponds and lakes, and sometimes rivers. This means that to house these Pokemon adequately, you'll need to get either a property that has a pond on it, or you'll need to put a big enough water feature in for them. To be honest, I would recommend getting a pool installed. If you do decide to go ahead with putting in a pond, then that's up to you, but do be aware that they are much harder to keep clean and healthy, and you won't see your Pokemon as well due to the naturally dirty and murky water. With a pool, you can set up a filtration system, and they are much easier to keep clean, and you can even go swimming with your Pokemon much easier than in a pond. Water health is going to be a major thing that you'll have to keep an eye on though, especially since you can't really use any of the normal chemicals that people put into pools, since it would negatively affect your Pokemon's health. Instead, you'll have to invest in a very good filtration system to keep the water flowing, and constantly clean the pool to get out any stuff like leaves, food bits, and waste from your Pokemon. It's going to be a constant process, one that you'll have to attend to almost every day. That's just the unfortunate reality of having water Pokemon like this. At least it's not a saltwater enclosure. Those can be a lot harder and more expensive to keep and maintain. When talking size, Psyduck will obviously need the smaller enclosure. For them, an in-ground pool of about 10 by 20 feet should provide plenty of space for your Pokemon to move around and get their exercise. Psyduck itself is also not the best of swimmers, so a smaller pool wouldn't go amiss with them. Golduck, though, is an amazing swimmer, being able to outpace even the best of human athletes. For that reason, a Golduck enclosure should be a minimum of 25 feet by 50 feet, allowing them to fully stretch their muscles when they want to. Depth-wise, most of the pool should be a depth between 8 to 10 feet deep, allowing your Pokemon to dive down below the water and giving them plenty of room to swim. However, I would still have a shallow section at one end of the pool, making it much easier for your Pokemon to get in and out. This isn't so much a concern for Golduck thanks to its strong arms, but Psyduck could have a bit of trouble if the pool is too deep. I would recommend that you have a section of the pool that gets down to a foot in depth, providing a decent place for them to rest in the water and get in and out of the pool. And always remember that you can easily put a Psyduck in a Golduck's enclosure without doing any harm to it. So if you know that you'll be going for a Golduck in the long run, then it would be best for you just to get the larger enclosure right from the beginning. It's plenty cheaper that way, and you don't have to worry about expanding the enclosure when your Pokemon gets close to evolving. Another part of this enclosure is going to be their land home. As a semi-aquatic species, the Psyduck line spend most of their time in the water, but when resting or at night, they will come onto land and find a nice, safe spot where they can bed down. So you'll have to provide them that. And the best solution to this is our trusty old friend, the shed. You should get a shed that's big enough for the Pokemon to enter and lay down comfortably inside. For a Psyduck, this means getting them a shed that's at least 10 by 10 feet, and Golduck should have one that's at least 15 by 15 feet. Since they'll really only be using this area as a sort of nesting spot, you can place down a hefty layer of soft bedding across the entire floor, whether that be some form of hay, or an actual Pokemon bed, or even of some material that you can get from the store. Lastly, the shed should have a closing door that you can close every night when your Pokemon goes to bed, keeping away any predators that may come snooping around for a fight late at night. Then, in the morning, as the sun's coming up, you go outside and open the door back up and let your Pokemon out into the water. The only major maintenance that you'll have to do for the inside of the enclosure is clean up any mess that your Pokemon makes inside, and replace the bedding every now and then when it starts to get too squished down or smelly. Another thing you should consider is a small fence. It isn't likely that these Pokemon will go wandering away once they get used to having the pool as their water source, but having a small fence there to keep them from wandering away won't go amiss. It doesn't even have to be that tall, only about 4.5 feet, since these Pokemon aren't exactly known for their verticality. I also would like to mention the weather. These Pokemon can be found all over the place, but they tend to stick to either temperate or tropical climates. Mostly they tend to stick around warmer waters and weather, so if you live in an area that is cold or gets very cold for some part of the year, then you'll have to take that into consideration. This means winterizing the pool and sleeping hut and making sure that your Pokemon are remaining healthy during these times. During these cold periods, your Pokemon will enter a sort of dormant, more restful state, as they try to conserve energy. Just remember to keep an eye on your Pokemon during these times, and if they start to get too thin, or even more sluggish than they should be during the winter, take them to the Pokemon Center immediately and consult an expert in Water-type Pokemon to figure out if there is something wrong with either your enclosure or how you're caring for these Pokemon already. As for other Pokemon that can be housed with your Psyduck evolution, it's a tough situation. Psyduck, and especially Golduck, are omnivores, meaning they will eat most anything that you end up putting in the enclosure with them. They'll go after small fish and prey animals like Magikarp, Barboach, and even semi-aquatic Pokemon like Lotad. If it seems weaker than your Pokemon and they think they could make a meal out of it, they'll probably try. So having small Pokemon is a no-go. But then you shouldn't put anything too big or aggressive in there with them either. So no feraligators or anything like that. Honestly, it might be best just to leave them be on their own, but if you really want to have another water-type Pokemon with them, then the best candidates would be the other Psyduck evolutions, the Weasel line, the Ducklet line, or the Cantonian Slowpoke line. They shouldn't be thought of as food, and aren't too dangerous that they'll pick a fight with your Golduck. As for other Pokemon, just the same general rules with water Pokemon. Keep them away from fire, rock, and ground types, and keep electric and grass types away from them, just to avoid any really bad fights. Availability. In the wild, Psyduck are everywhere. Strange for a bird that has no flight capability, but they have a presence in almost every region out there. In Kanto, their home region, they're on a ton of routes there. Paldea, they're in a ton of areas, and Sinnoh has a lot of routes that you can just run into them. Almost every region is like that, having a bunch of different places where not only Psyduck, but also Golduck can be found in the wild. The only ones that have a shortage on them are the Kalos region, where they only appear on routes 7 and 22, and Hoenn, where they have been stocked in the Safari Zone for trainers to catch. And to be perfectly honest, Psyduck aren't that terribly dangerous, so going out and catching one is feasible for the average trainer. Just always remember that no matter the Pokemon you're hunting, they can always cause you harm, and you should always bring your own Pokemon along for protection, if not another person that has their own Pokemon as well. As for the breeder scene, these are fairly uncommon Pokemon to have. The fact that you need to install a pool for them to be housed is a big investment. Usually that investment is offset by the fact that you could easily house multiple kinds of Pokemon in an enclosure like that, thanks to the depth of the pool providing much more space than the average enclosure. But thanks to the predatory nature of these Pokemon, especially Golduck, it can be kinda tough to raise them and get your money's worth. Especially because they're so abundant in the wild that many people can just go out and catch one pretty easily. And it's a lot cheaper than if they bought one from a breeder. Now, that's not to say that breeder-raised ones don't have their perks. For one thing, you are certain that the Pokemon is healthy, which is not something you can say about every wild-caught Pokemon. Dealing with sickness and parasites is not fun, trust me. And if you get a breeder-raised one, then they're certainly going to be much more used to humans being around them than if you got a wild one. Which is nice when you have a pet that doesn't run or attack when they see you. It's just a matter of if you're willing to pay to get that head start on having your Pokemon. Care. Food is pretty simple for these guys. It's going to be a mix between veggies and meat, specifically fish meat. Psyduck actually eats more greens than Golduck, which is nice for them in the wild so they aren't competing with each other, but it is a bit of a pain when raising them since you have to change around the proportions of food when they evolve. With Psyduck, you'll be giving them about 1.5 pounds of food a day, divided between 2 meals, morning and night. With Psyduck, you'll be giving them about 75% veggies, lettuce and peppers being the ones that I recommend, but really any will work, and 25% fish meat, the best being either Magikarp or even Basculin. Upon evolution, Golduck will instead get 3 pounds of food a day, again between morning and night. This time, you'll be making it about 50% veggie and 50% fish meat, accounting for the increase in muscle that Golduck gets. The best way to actually give them the food is in a big bowl. Just fill it full of food and give it to them. No worries about prepping or slicing anything. Their beaks are strong enough that they can chew through the toughest veggies with very little difficulty. Thankfully, interactions with these Pokemon is a lot simpler than most other bird Pokemon. Mostly because they can't fly away from you. This makes it easier for you to bond with them and form a sort of connection with them. So, to begin, you're going to want to wait until the Pokemon is used to you being nearby. This will happen naturally as you spend time around them and feed them, though the time frame for when they'll allow you to get close to them will really depend on the individual and if you got a wild-caught Pokemon or if you bought a breeder-raised one, which will greatly speed up this process. Once the Pokemon trusts you enough to get close to them, then you want to try hand-feeding them. Hold a piece of their food in your palm, allowing the Pokemon to come to you for the food. Be sure to keep your fingers away from the food, as these Pokemon's beaks can be very strong, and you don't want them nibbling on your digits. Also, be aware that they may be hesitant to feed from your hand, but just keep trying, and as the bond between you grows, they will get more comfortable with feeding. Now, while they're feeding from your palm, you're going to attempt to pet them. They may get a bit nervous when you do this, but again, just keep at it, as this is the important part of the training. If your Pokemon can get used to you touching them, then it'll make your life a lot easier when you need to clean their enclosure or take them to the Pokemon Center for checkups. And really, that's it for the basics, but you can always end up teaching your Pokemon more, such as how to respond to its name, which I always recommend giving your Pokemon a name. And I would like to also say that this training will go much faster with Golduck as opposed to Psyduck, thanks to its ability to telepathically communicate and take in concepts and other ideas from your mind, leading to them understanding what you intend to do with this training. The last thing we're going to talk about with the care section is care for the water. As this Pokemon spends a lot of time in their water, then the water is going to get gross. Dirt tracked into the water, waste left in the water by the Pokemon, and even just algae that grows in the water just by being in the sun, all of that will conspire to make the water this gross green mess, really more of a swamp than anything. And that isn't good for the Pokemon, so you'll have to clean out the pool roughly once a week. This should involve draining the water from the pool, scrubbing down the walls with Pokemon Safe Cleaner and some water, and then refilling the pool. It's not too hard of a job, but it will be time consuming, especially having to drain the pool and refill it. That will be hours of just water flow, so be prepared for that. Also, getting a decent filter can help keep the water clean longer. It won't eliminate the need to clean the pool, but it might make the time between cleanings extend, which is nice because draining and refilling the pool can be a heavy burden on your water bill. Cost. Hate to say it, but your food expenses are going to be in the high category. It's mostly due to the seafood and how much of it you're going to need to feed these Pokemon. Seafood takes a lot of effort to catch or farm, so it tends to be more expensive than most other meat. Combine that with the amount of veggies that you'll need, and it's going to be a bit of an expense. I suppose Psyduck might be down in the moderate category since it eats less seafood than Golduck, but that might also depend on how close you are to the sea and water in general. The Pokemon itself will probably be in the moderate category if you decide to get one from a breeder. Mostly that's because of the cost of building the enclosures of these Pokemon, which we'll get into in a second. But breeders pass that cost on to the people that purchase the Pokemon. Other than that, they are pretty easy to raise, and you can raise a bunch of them together, so it does moderate out the price somewhat. Or you can spend the price of a couple Pokeballs and catch one out of the wild. Which, while I still think that getting a breeder one is better, it will be cheaper, especially since you won't have to go region hopping to catch one if you want to. Lastly, the enclosure is going to be the biggest cost when it comes to these Pokemon. It's going to be in the very high category, no two ways about it. You're going to have to hire a company to come in and dig a big hole in the ground that you can then fill with water. And then you'll need to actually fill it with water, which will cost you a bit in your water bill. Not to mention the shed that you'll need to buy for the sleeping room, the fencing you'll need to put up around the enclosure, and the fact that you'll need to drain and refill the enclosure at least once a week. All of that together means that a lot of money is going to be dropped on this enclosure. Conclusion. Surprisingly, despite their somewhat predatory and their somewhat unreliable psychic abilities, this line makes great household Pokemon. They're very easy to train, probably because of those psychic abilities in Golduck's case, and I think would be great Pokemon for people that are new to housing water-type Pokemon. Even the enclosure is great because once you build a strong enough bond with them, you can dive in and go swimming in the pool with them, as long as you're willing to put up with the slight grossness of the water. The only sticking point that I can see with these Pokemon is the constant habitat maintenance that'll have to be done, and taking care of them in the winter could become a bit tricky. But aside from those points, I think these Pokemon could easily end up becoming the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we cover the angry fighting type Mankey and its evolutions Primeape and Annihilape. Have a wonderful night, everyone.